Hello, everybody. Thank you for making the time to join us today. Hello, everybody. Thank you for making the time to join us today. I'm welcoming you today on behalf of all the collaborating organizations who have made organizations and networks who have made this parallel event possible in the CSW 67. So I welcome all of you on behalf of the Public Services International, Viego, that is the Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing, Navi, AfriFem, Macroeconomics Collective, and Oxfam, who have made this happen. I'm going to shortly hand over to Nilanjana Mukhia, who is going to be our facilitator for the day. But before we begin anything, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Amita. I work with Oxfam, and I'm going to run us through some housekeeping rules and things to keep in mind. So I'll just go over that with all of you. I hope all of you are comfortable and able to listen in. Okay, for those of our friends who are going to want to listen in Spanish, French, and Arabic, we do have interpretations. So I want to draw your attention to the interpretation icon or the globe that you can see in the center of your scene on your screen. And please select the language that you want to listen in. I know there are going to be 3 speakers in Spanish, and people who want to listen into English will have to select English at that point. I'm assuming that most of you are otherwise tuned into English. And those who want to listen in Arabic, sometimes you might see the icon Chinese instead of Arabic because there has been some glitch there. So if you see Chinese language available, it is actually Arabic. So please choose Chinese if you want to listen in Arabic, but sometimes you might actually see Arabic, and that is fine. For the others, Spanish and French is available. Please participate in a manner which respects the voice and agency of all the speakers in genders and identity. We want this to be a safe space for all of us. I want you to introduce yourself in the chat. Just write your name and your organization or from where you're joining us. So we would like to know that. But for questions and answers, there is a special scene. There's a special place there at the bottom of the screen. You can see a Q&A icon. Please try and put your questions and answers, your questions only in that place. And even if you put it in Spanish or French or any other language, we are fine with it. We'll make sure that your question is answered, but please be brief so that we don't have to wait through a lot of text. But at the same time, if you want to write or share something, comment, then please feel free to go and do it in the chat. So that's all from my end. Now I'm going to introduce you to our facilitator of the day, who is Nilanjana Mukhia. Nilanjana is an avid feminist, has been involved in issues of care for a long time. She's also the co-founder of South Feminist Futures, which is a voluntary network. At the same time, she's also the Gender Justice Director at Oxfam International Secretariat, and many of you probably know her from her associations with ActionAid and other places. So I'm very happy to hand it over to Nilanjana Mukhia, who will take us through the session today. Over to you, Nilanjana.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amita, and thanks everyone for joining us. It's CSW time again. Unfortunately, a lot of us on here aren't with you at CSW, but we are here on Zoom. I wanted to we have a host of amazing speakers, but I wanted to just give you a sense of how this panel is going to go, how this session is going to go. So we're going to have 3 speakers speaking first. I will of course introduce them, and then we will have one discussant who's going to respond to what we've heard from the 3 speakers, and then we're going to speak to a few of our amazing union representatives who unionize care workers. So that's the flow of the session. I'm not going to take a lot of your time. I'm sure that those of you who are interested in this session are aware of the increasing momentum around the question of care. And it started, of course, we owe the legacy of this work to feminist economists all over the world, feminist economists in the global south, who have been working on social reproduction more broadly, and of course, care, unpaid and paid care, and the right to care framing has also come from feminist and union women in unions and care workers themselves. And what we are trying to do is to speak to that, not just the right to care, but what does the right to care need in terms of what the macroeconomic public policy, legal and international human rights treaties, what kind of research, what kind of evidence gathering, and what kind of organizing do we need to do to ensure that there is the right to care. And I am going to hand over very quickly to our first speaker, who is going to talk about I also wanted to say, that it's not that we would also contest the question of the right to care, right? So we are framing the right to care. We are talking about the right to care from the macroeconomic public policy perspective, from the legal and human rights perspective, from organizing care workers perspective, but we also want to complicate the framing of the right to care, and especially from an intersectional or global South feminist perspective. I'm going to invite Professor Laura Potasi, who will speak about care as a human right and a public good, outlining international human rights treaties and legal frameworks that support this framing of the right to care. And I'm absolutely thrilled to invite Laura. Laura is a professor at the University of Buenos Aires Law School in Argentina. She specializes in a gender and human rights approach to public policies. She is a founding member and president of the Latin America Justice and Gender Team. She is the director of Interdisciplinary Working Group on Social Rights and Public Policy. She also works as a researcher for the Scientific, Technical Research Council. I'm not going to attempt to read out to you the Spanish the original in Spanish, because I'm sure I'm going to murder it. But Laura, you are most welcome to reference the Institute as well. Laura, I'm going to hand over to you. You have 10 minutes. I will also sort of prompt you once we come to closer to 10 minutes at the 8-minute point. Laura, absolutely thrilled. Please go ahead.
Muy buenos días, muchísimas gracias por esta convocatoria a Oxfam y el enorme privilegio de poder estar discutiendo aquí con ustedes, presentando todo lo que ha sido el recorrido de la definición del cuidado como un derecho humano. Para ello tengo una presentación que quiero compartirles. Creo que ahí la están viendo bien, donde precisamente en este recorrido dentro de la región hemos podido definir, en primer lugar, saber de qué estamos hablando cuando hablamos de cuidados. Esto me parece que es un punto muy importante a quienes estamos aquí interesadas en el cuidado, porque precisamente la característica del cuidado es que es un concepto polisémico, es decir, esto también ha sido, como nos han enseñado las pioneras teóricas en esta discusión, es lo que ha permitido también su visibilización. Entonces, el cuidado son una serie de actividades constitutivas de la sociedad que van a permitir la sostenibilidad de la vida, pero centralmente que nos atraviesan a todas, atraviesan todos los ámbitos de la vida. Esto va a incluir el cuidado, el autocuidado, es decir, el cuidado propio, el cuidado de los otros, pero también toda aquella gestión y las precondiciones que permiten este desarrollo del cuidado. Ahora, nos ha llevado mucho tiempo que se reconozca el valor social de los cuidados, pero también que se reconozca como trabajo Y este ha sido el gran aporte del feminismo contemporáneo. No solamente es una actividad central en la vida, que implica también afectividad, subjetividad, sino que también es un trabajo, y es un trabajo que genera valor económico. Las economistas feministas han hecho un extraordinario aporte para identificar toda la producción de valor económico del cuidado. Pero también nos refiere a un núcleo crítico de desigualdad, la injusta división sexual del trabajo y de los cuidados, que es una injusta división sexual que nos caracteriza a todas en la región. Claramente yo vengo del sur global, de América Latina, y precisamente este es el continente más desigual de la Tierra. Pero además también es interesante que tengamos un acuerdo conceptual sobre lo que estamos discutiendo aquí. El cuidado puede ser inherentemente no remunerado o remunerado. Esto va a condicionar las decisiones de género. Precisamente es un orden atravesado por las desigualdades estructurales de género. Por lo tanto, va a condicionar las prácticas vinculadas al cuidado, pero también las corresponsabilidades sociales en las cuales históricamente el cuidado estuvo concentrado, asignado al ámbito privado y con ello a las mujeres. Por lo tanto, esta conceptualización del cuidado como trabajo, como una necesidad de la vida atravesada, va a llevar claramente a la demanda de la autonomía, que en el caso de las mujeres hablamos de una autonomía económica, de una autonomía física, llevar adelante una vida libre de violencias, pero además también poder ejercer nuestros derechos sexuales y reproductivos, pero también de autonomía de política. Por lo tanto, estamos hablando de una cuestión vinculada, si estamos hablando de desigualdades estructurales, a un ejercicio de derechos. Y me voy a concentrar por qué hablamos de derecho al cuidado o la necesidad de su conceptualización como tal. Cuando revisamos en todo a nivel global las regulaciones, las normas, las leyes concentradas, vemos que el cuidado ha estado siempre regulado. La primera forma de regulación ha sido el derecho civil y el derecho de las familias, donde esa asignación naturalizada del orden patriarcal asignó en la normativa también una responsabilidad inicialmente a las mujeres respecto al cuidado, pero las decisiones en torno a los varones. Muchos de nuestros marcos normativos en la región otorgan solamente a los padres varones las responsabilidades respecto a toma de decisiones respecto a los hijos. Esto que llamamos la patria potestad, que es una figura que viene del derecho romano en adelante. Pero también en el ámbito laboral está reconocido el cuidado, el derecho al cuidado, pero está un reconocimiento también con sesgos androcéntricos y sesgos de género. ¿Por qué? Porque la mayor regulación contemplada es el tiempo para el cuidado, que se asocia a las licencias por nacimiento y básicamente una licencia por maternidad. De la misma manera, el derecho a la seguridad social para personas asalariadas formales, es decir, que es excluyente de otros tipos de trabajos remunerados, solamente va a otorgar a aquellas que tienen un contrato legal ciertas protecciones en términos del ejercicio del cuidado, y lo mismo pasa con el derecho tributario. Ahora bien, en las regiones del sur global, una de las prácticas más frecuentes son también formas de políticas sociales que han caracterizado este siglo XXI respecto a programas de transferencia condicionadas de ingreso, donde en general la corresponsabilidad o la contraprestación para la percepción de ingresos está vinculada a prácticas de cuidados. Entonces, la condición para ingresos y recibir y ser perceptoras de esas transferencias de ingresos está vinculada a los cuidados. Sin embargo, esa vinculación a los cuidados no está en un reconocimiento autónomo para las mujeres, sino en vinculación con su condición de madres o su estructura de pobreza. Es decir, lo que tenemos en la región en términos regulatorios, y sobre todo América Latina, que está avanzando centralmente sobre sistemas nacionales de cuidados, es una consideración del cuidado vinculado a ciertas situaciones, sea la condición de madre, sea la condición de pobreza, sea la condición de persona mayor, o sea la condición vinculada al trabajo remunerado, asalariado formal, es decir, que medie un contrato de trabajo. Ahora bien, lo que pudimos lograr, y ese fue un trabajo pionero que se hizo a nivel de América Latina, es aplicar una metodología que ha caracterizado este siglo XXI, que es el enfoque de derechos humanos. Aplicando esa metodología, lo que pudimos identificar es que el cuidado si bien no se lo llamaba como cuidado, no se lo denominaba como tal, está en todos los instrumentos de derechos humanos. El concepto de vida digna incluye el cuidado. Y allí definimos que el cuidado es el derecho a cuidar, el derecho a ser cuidado y el derecho al autocuidado. Y ahí se abre un núcleo interpretativo sumamente importante. Por lo tanto, si estamos identificando y hemos identificado que el corpus de derechos humanos habla que el cuidado es un derecho humano, hay obligaciones. Obligaciones de hacer, que las denominamos obligaciones positivas, y obligaciones de no hacer o abstenerse negativas, que son la base central del sistema de derechos humanos y nos genera esta interdependencia. Es decir, los estados están obligados a garantizar derechos civiles, políticos, económicos, sociales, culturales y ambientales. Por lo tanto, el cuidado es un derecho humano que ya está reconocido como tal, si bien no se dice derecho al cuidado, no se lo denomina como tal, y le aplican todos los estándares de derechos humanos. La universalidad en el ejercicio del derecho al cuidado, el contenido mínimo del derecho, es decir, los estados están obligados a satisfacer al menos el contenido mínimo de los derechos, en condiciones de igualdad y no discriminación, garantizando el acceso a la justicia, pero a su vez centralmente a partir de medidas que impliquen la progresividad respecto a la satisfacción de este derecho y una prohibición explícita de regresividad. Estos estándares en la identificación son los que están, como les decía, en todas las convenciones de derechos humanos, pero además también en el caso de América Latina, en el ámbito de decisión política de las agendas de género, que es la Conferencia Regional de la Mujer de América Latina y el Caribe, fue donde a partir de la conferencia de Quito del 2007 se reconoció que el cuidado es un derecho humano. Ya en la Convención de las Personas con Discapacidad, junto con la Convención Interamericana, es decir, para el Sistema Interamericano de Protección de Derechos Humanos, ya reconocen estas dos convenciones el derecho al cuidado. Y eso nos ha generado un cambio de agenda sumamente importante y cada uno de los consensos en los cuales terminan estas conferencias regionales, junto con el corpus de derechos humanos, llevan a este reconocimiento del derecho como un derecho humano. Y entonces, ¿qué significa? Y con esto voy concluyendo en razón de tiempo. El cuidado es reconocido como un trabajo, pero también como un derecho de la persona. Y ese es el gran cambio transformador del reconocimiento del cuidado como un derecho humano. ¿Por qué? Porque no se sitúa en función de la condición, que eran esas primeras regulaciones normativas, sino en la condición de persona. Cada uno de nosotros tenemos derechos a cuidar, a ser cuidados y al autocuidado. Por lo tanto, va a interpelarnos respecto al ejercicio de un derecho de ciudadanía y esa autonomía que veíamos al inicio, que es la autonomía que está siempre en tensión en las mujeres, porque las desigualdades estructurales y la concentración de responsabilidades de cuidados en las mujeres impiden este ejercicio. Por lo tanto, el reconocimiento del cuidado como un derecho humano implica universalizar la responsabilidad, implica que haya obligaciones claras para el Estado, para las organizaciones sociales comunitarias, para las personas y dentro de las familias, no solamente para las mujeres, sino para los varones, y también para el sector de las empresas civiles o el sector privado. Entonces, aquí lo que tenemos es este reconocimiento, y con esto termino por el tiempo, que hay estándares en los cuales el derecho está reconocido, el cuidado está reconocido como un derecho humano, le aplican estándares de género, hay una interdependencia en términos de obligaciones de Estado y implica obligaciones de efecto inmediato, exigibilidad y justiciabilidad. Pero como la experiencia del Sur Global también nos ha mostrado, no solamente es suficiente con este reconocimiento del cuidado de derecho, sino que requerimos políticas públicas transformadoras que interpelen todos los órdenes, la economía, el trabajo, la salud, la vivienda, el transporte público. Con esto quiero decirles y agradecerles la atención y reafirmar que este ejercicio del cuidado como derecho humano nos implica una lógica transformadora a nivel regional, pero también a nivel global. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was such an important starting point to see how the right to care is a human right And even if it's not identifiable in the existing sort of existing legal framework and existing instruments, that it is a human right. And what you said at the last minute really links at the end really links well to what we want to hear from Ritu about, which is within the global South context, where where there is a debt crisis, where there's austerity, what kind of public policies are possible, and what kind of macroeconomic policies and fiscal policies are necessary in order to deliver on the right to care. And at this point, I would invite Ritu. Ritu is going to speak to us precisely about that, and she will expand and explore with us what she terms the lens of feminist finance, locating the right to care within macroeconomics and public policy, as well as state responsibility. And I have to apologize before we even hand over. Your bios your work and experience are so extensive, but I'm going to just edit them so that we can hear you. So Professor Ritu Divan is the Vice President of the Indian Society of Labor Economics, Vice President of Indian Society of Agricultural Economics, Visiting Professor at the Institute of Human Development, co-founder of the Feminist Policy Collective, Trustee of Center for Budget and Governance Accountability, Trustee of the India Forum, Women's Director of the Leaflet and President of the Indian Association for Women's Studies from 2014 to 2017. And her latest work focuses on the theoretical empirical analysis of paid, unpaid work, titled Invisible Work, Invisible Workers, the Sub-Economies of Paid and Unpaid Work, as well as other incredibly important papers. Ritu, welcome, Ritu, and please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Nilanjana, for the introduction. And of course, Oxfam for organizing this very, very essential component. I think the concept note and the way you've linked it up with human rights is something which is really absolutely essential in the broader debate. For me, the issue lies at two levels, or actually multiple levels, each one of which are interlinked. And of course, I think the broadest context is that of the nature of the state, that how is the state constructed? And for this, what I call the macro patriarchal construct of the state. And that the state, the economy that it represents and the economy that it builds up cannot exist unless there is a supportive economy, what is called the unpaid economy. So really what we are talking about is the interlinking of two sub-economies, the paid economy and the unpaid economy, and intermingling between the two independently as well as simultaneously is an underpaid economy. And I think that is something which we really need to focus on, that when the wages are below minimum wages or below even a living standard, what it does to the care work of women, and of course the issues of gender equality and human rights. Now, within this context, of course, I mean, generally the debates which have taken place, whether internationally or in the global South, consist primarily of how do we resolve the issue, or how do we improve, how do we get more recognition for care as a right and for care as a human right. And seeing this in the broadest contextualization of the term, of course, I think what we all understand and what we all need to focus on, and we have been focusing on, is that the total burden, the total care burden needs to be reduced. It's not just the care burden which is existing, how it is to be redistributed at the micro level or between within a family. That is of course an outcome of this, but the primary issue is the reduction, and this reduction can only take place at the macroeconomic level, or through public policies, through allocations to public policies. Now, we have done, I think there's a lot of work which has been done in the issue of allocations, whether it's through the budget or whether it's outside the budget, etc. And a lot of this, which is evidence-based and needs to be even more strongly evidence-based in terms of data, whether it is quantitative data or whether it is qualitative data, both are absolutely essential, because measuring care work, we know, or through our various time use studies, etc., is extremely important, but can also be extremely problematic in several kinds of ways. There are several methodological issues which we can debate at a later point of time. Now, the evidence shows, what does the evidence show? That where does the maximum time spent by women? And here I would also like to add a section on which I think we really need some very, very serious research. We witnessed this in India during the pandemic policy and the most brutal lockdown, I think, in the history of the world. And that is the first response to the pandemic was closing and shutting down the entire country in terms of mobility within a matter of 4 hours. And this, what it gave rise to, I think, apart from many other aspects, is the issue. What was brought to us very, very strongly is migration. And within this, of course, women, but also single male migrants. And I think this is something we really need to take into account when we talk about the care work and the unpaid work, and that they too need at some point of time some kind of rectification. Evidence also shows us that the maximum amount of time which is spent by women in the global south, for sure, and I'm sure in many, many other places also, in many other continents also, is the hunt for fuel. Clean fuel is a dream, you know, one won't even get into that. The issue of firewood, and of course, the issue of water. I mean, these are the most essential, and women in India and in South Asia spend about 3 to 4 hours a day collecting this kind of, doing this kind of so-called care work, which is not really recognized as work. Now, within this, of course, there has been several amounts of study. I've been working on this for about 2 decades in India, and seen, particularly in the last few years, 4 or 5 years, a consistent reduction in allocations of public provisioning for water, for fuel, and for firewood. And these are things which we had fought for from the women's movement in terms of, you know, policies, in terms of agitations, etc. But this does not seem to have had any effect in the last few years in particular. In fact, you know, during the pandemic, when there was work from home and women were forced to stay at home, etc., whatever little subsidies had been given to fuel and water were actually withdrawn during this period of time, which I think is one of the most cynical policy reactions of a state, just when you need it more. Also, there's a lot of evidence-based research on this, is that women spend relatively less care time on childcare. And this I'm flagging very, very as a very central issue, because, you know, when you ask women how much time do you spend, it's 10 minutes and 15 minutes a day, or maybe half an hour a day that they spend on childcare. And this is really very, very worrying, because what it leads to is a reduction or the disappearance or invisibilization of the issue of child rights as human rights. Within this, of course, I'd like to emphasize that, of course, children as children, but the impacts of this, of reduced public provisioning and reduced allocations, consistently reduced allocations, is primarily going to impact not only short-term effects, but also in terms of long-term effects, because children are children, but they're also the future workforce. So the quality of the future workforce is also very much in debate. There is one aspect which is not really discussed, and that's something I'd like to focus on, and that is basically the revenue raising component. So the issue of subsidies, which have been withdrawn, the nature of taxes which are imposed, particularly indirect taxes which exist, which are much higher on commodities which are not only for consumption, but primarily commodities which are for children and for the poorer people. So you have, we have a tax rate in India, just to give you an illustration, that for diamonds, the tax rate, the indirect tax rate is 1%. But for notebooks and for healthcare, it is 18%. which means in a context of increasing asset and income inequality, very much so because of not only the pandemic, but the pandemic policy which exists, that you have a very, very sharp movement of the majority of the people. And this is not only the poor and the marginalized, of course, which is constituted about 76% of India's population, but also for us, what is beleaguered is the caste system, minorities, the denial of a large number of facilities to minorities, and of course to tribals. So you have a very strange kind of a revenue raising aspect which is there, which prioritizes some and assets which are very highly valuable, but deprioritizes and does not give any kind of relief, particularly where goods of mass consumption, which impact women, I mean, who are responsible for maintenance in the broader context of the household and also of consumption. There is also, and I think these are factors which impact not only South or global South, but also many countries, and that is the issue of increasing privatization. The privatization of public healthcare is one of the most problematic issues which are there, and the cost of private expenditure, particularly of the poor. I mean, for us in India, it has been identified as the one single reason, the issue of privatization of healthcare or non-availability of healthcare, closure of primary health centers, of hospitals, of reproductive rights centers, of non-reproductive rights centers also, where a large number of women are now taking off from paid work or underpaid work, or even from sleep, and leisure, of course, is something which is totally out of the entire debate, and spending their time on care. Also, the issues of aged, there is no recognition of those who are considered, senior citizens, absolutely, or their contribution. Physically challenged, that is another sector, and your allocations have been reducing very, very dramatically, including to those who are blind or visually challenged. And there are, I think, we have, of course, later on, there's a discussion, the second part of the panel, on the issues of caregivers. And India, we have a huge number. We have, I think, millions and millions of care workers, again, who are the schemes which came through, whether it's daycare centers or creches, but very few creches which do exist, is a large number of workers who are there, but who are not recognized as workers. So they are paid an honorarium. Their work is not recognized, neither the care work which they do, whether it's paid or whether it is unpaid, which exists. There is also, of course, and here I would like, the health issue is really something which is very, very central, is that insurance schemes of the state are now being increasingly privatized. And this is whether it's for farmers insurance or it's for health insurance, which exists, which really gives rise to the fact that your poverty levels are actually going up for the first time in 42 years, not only in absolute numbers, but in relative terms. And this is something where a collapsing economy exists. I can see Nilanjana has come back. I'll just finish off in a minute and say that, the issue of care, generally what we see is as a supply side, that women are not participating in the workforce because the major constraint which they have is unpaid work, which is true. But we have to link it to the huge decline in female work participation rates. And that is the demand side, I think, where we really also need to. So if their work time is freed, are they going to get employment? And this is something, I think, which defines the paradigm or the entire shift between the share of profit share and wage share. The wage share has been declining. Profit share has increased during the period of the pandemic. One would have thought sales are declining and actually the profit share, but they have increased at the cost of wage share. And within this, therefore, earlier when we talked about, jobless growth, I think today what the state is following really is anti-employment growth. And that is something I think we really need to take into account. The intermingling of the supply and demand side, seeing it in the broader framework of what the state constitutes and the kind of interest it represents, which have changed very dramatically in the past few years. Thank you so much.
Thank
Fatma.
you
Not
so
more
much,
to say.
Ritu.
lot more to say, but of
A
course.
lot more to say.
Yes.
We shall continue this.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
thank you so much, Ritu. I think really, I'm not going to take a lot of time, but thank you for. I think there is this tendency of thinking of care as very limited activities, even from within, and you have expanded care and social reproduction to whether it's water, physical infrastructure, water, fuel. You have linked it to neoliberal economic tenets of privatization, private health insurance, and sort of limiting employment and taking sort of limiting workers' rights as well. So thank you for doing that, Ritu. And I think that it's almost flowing in the most beautiful way. It's almost like we've been sitting around the room, all of us together. Fatima is, I'm going to invite Fatima to come in, and Fatima is going to similarly talk about care, the question of care, what it means in the context of the African continent, but we could say much of the South as well, and interrogate northern models and their applicability in our regions where we are stuck in debt austerity cycles and where states have been hollowed out, and which have all inflicted severe gendered consequences. And I would like to introduce Fatima. Fatima, are you there?
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Hi. Okay, fantastic. Let me introduce Fatima very quickly. Fatima is a feminist political economist and associate of NAWI AfriFem Macroeconomics Collective, with expertise in women's economic justice, including trade policy, labor rights, public services, budgets, and agricultural trajectories, and in education and health rights, among others. As an activist, her work covers intersectional approaches and underpins her technical expertise in research, design, implementation, management, and M&E. Organizationally, her past and ongoing presence has involved work with the women's groups, organizations, civil society, UN agencies, the Commonwealth Secretariat, NGOs, and government bodies. And I will end with saying that Fatima is also a scribbler of verse with a sporadic spoken word record since the late 1990s and the odd published piece. Fatima, please go ahead, and a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. Great. Well, I feel like some of what I'm going to say has already been sort of addressed actually by Ritu, but I'm going to try and perhaps contextualize that a bit more within the African context. And I'll start with some words from the African feminist post-COVID recovery statement that was released in 2020. And it says here, no turnaround in Africa's fortunes will happen without recognizing the economic, social, political, and cultural value of the care economy, where the provisioning of care goods and services to households and the economy is predominantly through women's invisibilized, unpaid, and domestic labor. The time is well overdue for policies that recognize the centrality of care work for health systems and the economy. And I start here because, you know, the question of care or of a care economy is one that Africa is often asked to look at, and Africans and African women in particular. But, you know, the discourse is largely owned by those external to the continent, or has been so far. And that's not because there isn't a discourse happening in various ways on the continent, but because the international development space, you know, has actually taken on so much of that. And so much of the programming that comes into the continent looks at care in different ways, but again, with that external imposition. So, you know, I've seen this myself in my own work, you know, developmentalist approaches to women's economic empowerment, for example, that are galvanized by donor, private sector interests, etc. And you don't have that sense of ownership of the narrative from within the continent itself. But, you know, this is changing, and it's very important, I think, for us to look at or to explore what our own narratives around this should be. And so today I'm actually centering sort of some of the work based on conversations and, you know, work that I have seen coming from a variety of African feminists, including Wangari Kinoti, Lino Some, Okosia Darkwa, Salima Valiani, Busi Sibeko, and more. And I think it's really important for me to name check them, because one of the aspects of this work also is that you find that many of those who are writing and speaking on these issues are not being recognized on the issue of care from the continent. And so I do that now in recognition of that. But what I want to do is, first of all, speak a little bit about what Rita sort of started off with, which is our context, the context that we're dealing with. The last 20 years, we have seen Africa have this Africa Rising narrative that's come with it. And now we look back and we see sort of the huge flaws in that, in particular in relation to jobless growth, growth that has increased inequality, beyond records, and the meaningless of it, and the meaningless indeed even of some of the proliferations of other successes, the proliferation of mobile tech, where, that so many people have a phone in their hand on one hand, but then, they still need to use a kerosene lamp, still need to walk 10 miles for water, still need to possibly walk even 20 miles to go to a village in order to boot up that phone, because that's where the nearest stable power point is. And so we have, this context that we're working with, and across Africa, we have, a multiplicity of experiences, and it's always important to recognize that we are a continent, but we also have strong commonalities that, that have this geographic base. We know that women do the majority of the work, but, that is a global phenomenon. But then, of course, women are predominantly found within the informal economy, and the formal economy is actually the driver of the economies at the state level within the continent. And so what we see here is the way in which care blends with the informal economy, and the blurred lines that come from it make it very difficult. And, when Rita was speaking about some of the challenges of the methodologies of actually being able to measure care, you can see that, whether we're talking about women managing childcare while they farm, the blurred lines of, the food that you process for the market as opposed to the food that you process for your larder, the crops you farm for subsistence and those you sell at the gate. And within all of this, we have also the reality that we have the highest fertility rate in the world. In fact, our rate is twice the global level, although albeit, it will be closer to some other regions at the same time. And in the provision of care, there has been a critical absence of the social contract between the state and the people. And so what you have seen is the role of wider communal families, distribution of care based on social, cultural relations. And whilst those existing frameworks that have been there for millennia are very important and have played a crucial part, what it has led to has been an absorption of that care work by those communities, by those individuals, with women constituting the disproportionate numbers in the delivery of care. And what you then see is that when there's a minimal provision of care support and facilities, there is a language or a narrative that comes into being where the onus of care being placed on an individual or on atomized units, whether it's a family, etc., replaces the idea of the right to care. And the question of the right to care then doesn't become as prominent. One of the most interesting sort of things regarding remittances, for example, and the huge importance of remittances to Africa from the diaspora has been that it has helped to subsidize, absent healthcare access, etc. And that has now become an additional atomization where, once again, families become reliant on themselves and only themselves to provide that care. To look at that in a bit more detail, Salima Valiani, one of our economists on the continent, feminist economists on the continent, looked at an African care economy index that she created. And, this covered various matrices, including maternal and parental leave, socialized childcare, socialized healthcare, even food production, amongst others. I think there were 10 in total, all adding up to a score of 30. Please do check it out if you can. And, the resounding result of that was all of the countries failed, scored horrendously low. I think none actually scored more than half of what was needed to be considered providing some kind of care. So it was out of 30, and I think 16 was sort of the marker. But, we really need to situate that within Africa's macroeconomic context. And this is where this issue of, so how rights are allowed to play out, is so central. We know that the continent is facing debt servicing of, huge record numbers. We've always been debt servicing, and this is critical. Busi Sebeko has also written an African feminist analysis of debt for Nawi, where she looks at what she calls the policy externalization and debt nexus. So this is the hidden costs that accrue in relation to the loss of revenue for social services. And alongside that, the external imposition largely from the IMF and IFIs of austerity policies that we know have hollowed out the state previously with the adjustment process in the 1980s and 1990s. Some people are calling this, structural adjustment 2.0, but in many ways it has not really gone away, because we saw that happening over the last decade post-financial crisis. And this is all happening in the context, furthermore, of huge illicit financial flows out of the continent, huge tax injustices, those regressive taxation policies that Ritu mentioned. And all of these add to the erosion, the further erosion of the social contract. And so when we think about what our own narratives could and need to be, we have to also take all of that into account. I mean, there is enormous infrastructure deficit. Just to give you some numbers, we're looking at $100 billion of infrastructural development, each year is needed on the continent. And so these are the kinds of challenges within which the right to care needs to be facilitated. And that's not to undermine the importance of political will. Many of our policymakers, have also committed to, a neoliberal school of thought, and that cannot be denied. But even if you're not of that bent within the policy space, you will find yourself facing immense odds on how to do this. And so when we think about what, a future for care could be on the continent, I think of the recent work by Wangari Kinoti, a Nawi sister who authored one of our recent publications that proposed an African feminist public services agenda. And within that, she spoke of the need to reclaim the public nature of care services by restoring the duty of the state for public care services and mobilizing finance through fair, progressive taxation as one example. But more to that, she also spoke, and here Kinoti and Valiani actually both mentioned this, of Ubuntu, which is, and I'm sure there are many of you who might have heard this, and this is where we really start to try and understand what an African perspective on care could be. So Ubuntu is captured, and I'm here drawing on Kinoti's sort of rendering of it, a philosophy that covers well-being, community, and humanness across the continent, the being of belonging to a sense of collectivity. And there are various iterations of this you will find in the continent in different languages. But Kinoti speaks of it as, a sustainer of household, communities, and the earth, and one that will challenge. And here I'm sort of, add in my own analysis, the current unequal division of care that is not only gendered. And she also speaks of the importance of it, of understanding how it is also racialized and classed, and therefore exploits women's labor. And what this can ultimately do is challenge the way the onus is firmly placed on atomized units of care. And this has been a problem consistently, even within welfare systems and care systems that have reached some level of, functionality and universality, such as in the UK. The redistribution of care has not really happened in terms of a social norm approach, from my own experience of being here in the UK at all. We have increased labor-saving devices, for example, but the people still operating those labor-saving devices are women. And so there needs to be a reframing in many ways of our values in the way we understand care. And that needs to not be something that happens in this sort of ephemeral sort of space as a philosophical conversation. It needs to be re-embedded within the way in which the state conceptualizes the economy and conceptualizes care as a part of social reproduction and as part of the economy in and of itself. And I could speak a bit more about how that could be done more practically. There are some things starting to come through from pieces of writing that haven't even been published yet, that I've been very privileged to look at, but I'm not at liberty to discuss yet, that look at how potentially this could happen at the state level when we're talking about such things as maternity leave or care in the home, care for the elderly, etc. But I will stop there because I feel I have probably blown my time and pass it back to Nilanjana now.
Thank you so much, Fatima. And thank you for, again, I think you and Ritu both talked about, Ritu framed it as if the reduction of unpaid care, the responsibility has to be the state and public policy and budgetary allocations. And you are talking, you're contesting the social norms approach as really transformative and bringing back the role of the state and recognizing social reproduction as part of the economy and what the state responsibilities are. So thanks for doing that, and also, of course, placing it within debt austerity privatization, similar to what we heard before. And I am going to invite, thank you, Fatima, that was wonderful. I'm going to invite Anam to respond as a discussant, to respond to all three presentations here. Anam Parvez Bhatt is the head of research at Oxfam GB, where she provides leadership in defining and implementing the research agenda around valuing women's work, fragility and conflict, and climate justice. And she is a feminist who is passionate about integrating an intersectional and decolonial approach in research and supporting others across Oxfam to do so. And Anam has co-authored 2 of Oxfam's flagship inequality reports, Public Good of Private Wealth and Time to Care, and has produced guidelines for effectively integrating gender analysis in research. Anam, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm really honored to be a part of this panel with feminists whose work I deeply, deeply admire. So thank you so much for bringing me into the space. So I'll start off by offering reflections on what speakers before me have shared and some additional thoughts on the rights of caregivers and the role of norms and narratives. So firstly, some reflections. So Laura has shared fantastically why, grounding a right to care in a human rights framing is so important. How it enables us to recognize those receiving care and caregivers as rights holders, and independent of individual conditions of employment, migration, etc. And it's also important to recognize how the state has the overall and primary responsibility for ensuring the provision of care for all. And this is especially critical, and Ritu spoke of this in the context of care being increasingly privatized and assets stripped at the behest of international financial institutions and donor governments. Ritu also spoke about, how governments need to be raising revenues through progressive taxation, and then really linking the revenues to feminist budgeting in areas and spending in areas where they're needed the most. So I'll definitely, Ritu, be using the diamonds versus notebooks comparison, which I found to be quite compelling. And then, of course, Fatima has clearly articulated how the right to care needs to be understood and framed within the colonial and extractive, macroeconomic governance architecture. And she's further contextualized that in the African context. And showing how many countries in the global majority are unable to invest in care, partly as a result of undemocratic Western-led austerity policies. And this really needs to be upended if we are to make any real progress. A common thread that I've also picked up is that the right to care framework has to be informed by an intersectional and global South perspective, and really led by the demands of those that carry out the majority of this work, or are least supported, women and girls, but particularly those marginalized on the basis of income, race, caste, ethnicity, disability, indigenous, as well as LGBTQIA+ people and the youth. So moving on to the rights of kind of caregivers and Oxfam's journey, and here as well, I'm really further emphasizing and amplifying and what's already been said. But just to share a bit about Oxfam's journey, at Oxfam over the past 10 years, we really shifted from the kind of micro women's economic empowerment towards more of a macro systems change approach, a more sort of radical and transformative feminist economic justice agenda. And this is really informed by all the work of feminist economists and activists, Diane Elson's 3R framework, Rizavi's Care Diamond, Escobar and others' work on transformative care policies, Femnet, Viego, Nawi, and many, many others. And central to this approach has been recognizing how care encompasses a number of different, and this is something that Laura talked about as well, complementary individual and collective rights, and unpacking what these rights are and how they can be guaranteed for all is really important. So that we ensure that it doesn't remain a theoretical exercise and that practical action really follows. So I'd like to highlight two rights of caregivers in particular, and this is again echoing what particularly Ritu and Fatima have said. So firstly, the right to water, the right to energy. So Ritu also, mentioned this, and Oxfam's research has also shown how in rural and low-income communities, access to basic physical infrastructure, piped water, electricity, sanitation is sorely lacking. And fuel wood and water collection are some of the most time-consuming and drudgerous activities. And we know that this is only going to get worse and is already getting worse with climate change. And in parts of Zimbabwe, providing access to an improved water source can actually reduce women's average unpaid care workloads by 4 hours a day. This is something our research has shown. And so it's important that we don't lose the focus on domestic work when we talk about care, as Ritu said. And we're seeing that this is happening, with international financial institutions taking on the care agenda, limiting it, just to childcare, for instance. Secondly, right to decent work and economic security. And Fatima also emphasized this. For most women in the global majority, paid work means informal work. In South Asia, it applies to 95% of, women workers. And most informal work we know is precarious, is low paid, and lacking social security, and unpaid care responsibilities make this even more likely as women opt for, part-time informal work to have the flexibility to fulfill care responsibilities. And this affects their ability to contribute towards social protection, accumulate wealth, making them more likely to live in poverty in old age. And as Ritu also said, it is really then important that we overcome this artificial separation between paid and unpaid work. And alongside investments in care infrastructure and services, really call for labor legislation and policies to ensure decent and dignified work. And this also includes the right to organize, the right to representation, negotiation, and freedom of association. My last point is that, and Fatima spoke about narratives a lot, and what I'd like to sort of add here is the need to address the kind of values and beliefs and narratives that are promoted by this capitalist, neo-colonial economic model that undervalues care. And these narratives are pervasive in, education institutes, governments, media, and society. And the first is the belief that the monetized or market economy is the entire economy, and that only activities that matter are those that produce monetary value or those that can be priced. And this, of course, then leads care to be excluded from mainstream measures of progress, such as GDP, and ignored in policymaking. And I think it's really, really important to learn from the feminist and decolonial alternatives to measures of progress that are out there, and the moral philosophies like Ubuntu, and see how we can scale them up and institutionalize them. The second are patriarchal beliefs that women, non-binary people, and their labor are inferior to men's, and thus not worth counting or investing in. And these intersect with the racialized, ethnocentric, classist narratives that those living in poverty, from minority ethnic or religious groups, from migrant backgrounds, are even less worthy of rights and dignity. And in the context of domestic workers, I'm from Pakistan, and this is very much a colonial legacy, which is really embedded in the master-servant relationship that we see. I'm just finishing up. I see you come on screen, Nilanjana. So a right to care framework really cannot be transformative if it doesn't concern itself with shifting these narratives. So just wanted to end by saying that it's really important that, you know, the right to care be informed by the needs and voices of those who have too long been denied, that it recognizes the central role of the state and articulates what that is, that it pushes back against Western-led privatization and austerity, and that we really challenge these problematic norms and narratives that continue to undervalue and invisibilize this work. My headphones keep falling off. Thank you. That's me.
Thank you so much, Anam. That was thanks for bringing all the different strands together, and I think you did that really, really well. And speaking to neoliberalism being neocolonialism, so that's a really, and how that affects social reproduction and care. And how to locate right to care within that. Thanks so much, Anam. So I see that there are a lot of questions around whether we'll be sharing the recording. We will. So if you've missed anything, don't worry, we'll share the recording. And just to say that Laura has to leave. So if you and she will send us the presentation that she made. So we can share that too. And if there are any questions for Laura, we can take that. I'm sure there are others who can respond to any questions for Laura, but we can also ask her later if we have the opportunity. So we are moving into the next part of this panel, and which is speaking to organizing care workers, other workers, including in the informal or popular economy. These are really important, and we've already heard how right to care includes the right to decent work conditions as well, and the rights of care workers. And we have Natalia who is joining us from Argentina, and she is the national coordinator at MTE. Again, Natalia, please go ahead and say the full name of your union, because I'm not going to do a good job. And MTE and Natalia also represent our affiliates of WeGo, who are co-sponsoring this panel. MTE arose in the crisis of 2001 in Argentina, where for workers, working conditions were very precarious. There were no place for childcare, no incentives, social work, etc. Today, MTE, after more than 20 years, works with multiple kinds of workers. They're not, and workers who are not merely concerned with the labor rights, but also think of the workers from her integrality. And that's so wonderful that Spanish sort of brings in language that is, that sort of, really encompasses. We don't have this in English. So think of worker from her integrality, taking into account her family, safety, transport, care spaces, etc. I will introduce Irene as well a little later, but Natalia, if you can tell us about your work with care workers and how central is ensuring decent work conditions to expanding care services and the right to care. And Natalia would be speaking in Spanish, so please you can choose the interpretation. Sorry, go ahead, Natalia, please.
Bueno, buen día, muchas gracias por la invitación, es un placer estar compartiendo y escuchando que se habla de los cuidados, ¿no? Nosotras que venimos haciendo este cuidado hace un montón de tiempo, la experiencia que yo voy a contar es del sector que yo represento. Yo soy una trabajadora de la economía popular. Esta experiencia nació en el 2009, cuando muchas trabajadoras cartoneras, recicladoras, tenían que ir a trabajar y no tenían cómo resolver el cuidado de sus infancias. El horario que iban a trabajar era de 5 de la tarde a 12 de la noche. Así nace la guardería cartonera, como la llamaban por aquel entonces. Hoy, después de un tiempo y de una construcción colectiva junto a muchas compañeras, hemos llegado a la conclusión de que nuestros espacios no son guarderías, porque cuando nos pusimos a enumerar toda la enorme tarea que se hace en esos espacios, nos queda muy chica la palabra guardería. Nuestra mirada es una mirada de derechos, entonces nuestras infancias no son objetos que se guardan. Hoy en la actualidad tenemos 13 espacios de cuidado. Una particularidad que tienen nuestros espacios es que la tarea es llevada adelante por las compañeras que pertenecen al sector. Son compañeras de la economía popular que toman el rol de educadoras populares y hacen esa enorme tarea del cuidado. Es una particularidad que tenemos porque ellas tienen mucho saber al vivir en el barrio, al estar en contacto con esas infancias, tienen un saber que a veces cuesta que una trabajadora o una maestra recibida que viene de otro sector pueda entender. Creo que es una particularidad de nuestros espacios que esa tarea la llevan adelante nuestras compañeras. También en conjunto con un equipo técnico que tenemos profesionales. Esta construcción colectiva y esta mirada que venimos construyendo del cuidado comunitario nos hace dar cuenta que el trabajo del cuidado no tiene un valor y no tiene un reconocimiento. Nuestras compañeras hacen una tarea enorme llevando adelante esos espacios, pero hoy no es reconocido, es invisibilizado. Si bien hay una oferta privada o gratuita de escuelas, de jardines, deja excluido el sector de la economía popular, porque nuestras trabajadoras tienen una particularidad. Yo doy un ejemplo, por ejemplo, una trabajadora cartonera tiene que salir a trabajar de 5 a 12 de la noche. Hoy en Argentina no hay un espacio del Estado que te ofrezca eso. Una trabajadora textil, que son las que cosen, tienen que tener jornadas extensas de trabajo. Una trabajadora rural que trabaja la tierra tiene que empezar a trabajar desde muy temprano. Bueno, hoy el Estado no nos ofrece un espacio para esas infancias que quedan excluidas. Nosotras hacemos ese trabajo, y digo nosotras porque yo soy una compañera que soy una educadora popular, coordiné también ese primer espacio de cuidado que nació en el 2009, fui educadora, fui coordinadora. Hoy ha pasado el tiempo y estoy en un rol más nacional, pero sé de lo que hablo porque yo habité esos espacios y esa construcción la hicimos junto a las compañeras. Entonces nosotros hacemos un trabajo que el Estado no lo hace. Llegamos a los lugares que el Estado no llega. Y hoy ese trabajo es invisibilizado, no es reconocido. Nosotros llevamos el trabajo con mucho compromiso, con mucha amorosidad, con mucha responsabilidad, pero trabajamos informalmente, no tenemos derechos laborales, no tenemos vacaciones, no tenemos licencia, no tenemos obra social, nuestro sueldo no es digno. Nada, es enorme el trabajo que hacen las compañeras, creo que es urgente pensar una política pública para el sector de la economía popular, para esas trabajadoras que es eso, ¿no? El cuidado está destinado casi en un 90% en las mujeres. Entonces, que estas mujeres de la economía popular puedan salir a trabajar, hacen que tengan independencia económica, que puedan ser más libres, que puedan elegir. Hoy no hay una política pública que abrace a nuestros espacios. Algo que nos parece súper importante es que a la hora de pensar la política pública tienen que hacerlo con una pata en el territorio, porque a veces se piensan políticas públicas que no tienen nada que ver con nuestro sector. Hoy en día nosotros llevamos adelante 3 espacios que estamos en toda la Argentina, estamos en varias provincias, pero sobre todo los espacios son concentrados en Buenos Aires. Y nos cuesta un montón sostener los espacios porque vamos buscando convenios que la verdad no nos sirven, porque tienen una particularidad que son convenios que se terminan rápido, son convenios que piden un montón de cosas y no contemplan al sector de la economía popular. Cuando se terminan los convenios, renovarlo es un montón de burocracia y algunos convenios tienen un tiempo determinado y después no se renuevan. Eso nos dificulta un montón toda esta red de cuidado comunitario que hemos construido a lo largo de estos años, porque el recurso humano no se puede sostener. Entonces nos cuesta un montón rearmar. Venimos construyendo esta mirada de el cuidado como un derecho y el cuidado como trabajo, ¿no? Bueno, nada, trabajo es lo que hacemos, no tenemos un reconocimiento, tenemos un reconocimiento salarial, pero aparte también nuestros espacios no solo estamos las compañeras que cuidamos a esas infancias, sino también nosotros pensamos nuestros espacios contemplando a esa trabajadora de la economía popular de forma integral. Entonces nuestros espacios tienen que ser espacios dignos, tienen que tener material didáctico, tienen que tener infraestructura. Bueno, hoy no hay una política pública que abrace a nuestro sector. Nosotros llevamos adelante los sectores con mucha, como se dice acá, con mucho corazón y con mucho esfuerzo, pero bueno, eso. Tenemos nuestras particularidades, el sector de la economía popular que no son contempladas. Consideramos que ser cuidado es un derecho y brindar cuidados es un trabajo. Muchísimas gracias, no sé si hablé muy rápido, disculpas, estoy como muy nerviosa, es la primera vez que estoy en un panel y nada, estoy contenta de poder contar la experiencia, pero también estoy muy nerviosa.
Thank you so much, Natalia. We are really pleased that you were able to join us and to talk about it's so important what you talked about. It's the non-acknowledgement of the care work, social reproduction, as well as the popular economy, informal economy, and it's the non-acknowledgement that actually. Even though it's the sort of market economy, formal economy is completely dependent on care, and the informal economy, it doesn't acknowledge it because then it goes on its balance sheet. So it externalizes. So what you're saying is incredibly important, and thank you for being here, and thank you for the work that you do. I hope you'll stay for questions if there are any. Thank you, Natalia, so much.
Muchas gracias a ustedes.
Thank you, Natalia. It was a pleasure having you. I'm going to ask Irene Khumalo I'm going to pass on to Irene Khumalo, and Irene, just to introduce Irene, Irene is with PSI, Public Services International, which is a global union federation of workers in public services. It has more than 700 trade unions representing 30 million workers in 154 countries. PSI brings their voices to the UN, ILO, WHO, and other regional and global organizations. They defend trade union and workers' rights and fight for universal access to quality public services. Public Services International is part of the original movement of internationals, united groups of socialists, trade unionists, and workers, created to link the struggles of the working class around the world. Irene herself is the PSI's World Women's Committee Chair, established by PSI, and also represents the Swaziland Democratic Nurses Union. And Irene, welcome, and we are so thrilled to have you. Irene, are you there? Maybe that you can spotlight Irene.
Yes, I'm here.
Fantastic, Irene. So thrilled to have you and hear from you. My question to you is, if you can speak to how PSI works with care workers, individual rights and collective rights, and how that can be framed into the recognition of the human right to care and care as a public good. Over to you, Irene. Thrilled to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and greetings to everyone. I'm very excited to be part of this forum on gender equality, and I'm pleased that I'll be answering the question, how care workers' individual and collective rights, how could they be framed into the recognition of the human right to care and as a public good. As I've been rightfully introduced, I'm a nurse by profession. Sisters, PSI and its World Women's Committee have been the driving force behind the paradigm shift that has just been rooted and has undoubtedly made considerable progress. Shifting the cause and discourse on care from the economic-based approach, care as a commodity and a service for profit, to the positioning of care as a universal human right. And this is now part of the global debate. Public Services International, with sister global unions, focused on shifting approaches to care away from the dominant approach, the care economy, to the social organization of care, and are calling for action to rebuild the social organization of care. A new model that puts caring for people over caring for profits. The International Labour Organization, ILO, has previously put forward the 5 Rs to address the failures in care with intent to address the decent work agenda. However, the ILO framework has been strengthened and advanced by PSI in its new agenda. In 2020, on the Global Day of Action for Care, PSI called for the 5 Rs as a way forward to rebuild the social organization of care. The 5 Rs being 1, recognize the social and economic value of care, paid or unpaid, and care as a human right. The second one, reward, remunerate, and represent. That is, reward, remunerate care work and care workers with professional work, equal pay for work of equal value, adequate pensions, comprehensive social protection, health and safe working conditions, and also the representation part, strong representation, unionization and collective bargaining and social dialogue in line with the ILO decent work agenda. The third one is reducing the burden of unpaid care work on women. And the fourth one, distribute care work within households among all workers, eliminating sexual division of labor and between households and state. Most importantly, the last one being reclaim the public nature of care services and restore the duty and the primary responsibility of the state to provide public care services and develop care systems that transform gender relations and women's lives. That is including the state's financing capacity to invest through fair and progressive taxation. Sisters, the recognition of a human right to care and care as a public good is the basis for framing the care discussion and raising the critical role of the state in making citizens experience and enjoy this right. The main consideration will then be to redistribute care work, not only inside the families or within the families, but also from families to the public services, making sure that the state avails quality public services that are universal, affordable, and accessible to all. The main transformation then tackles defeminization and defamiliarization of care work. This means transforming and building public care systems where unions need to fight for decent work for paid care workers in line with the ILO decent work agenda, making it and emphasizing that indeed it is a state's obligation. Of to note, commodification, underfunding, and weak regulation of the care sector means that most work is precarious. Social care and healthcare workers are increasingly hired on fixed term, either temporary, either agency-based, either part-time or self-employed contracts. This has been accompanied by a rise in the outsourcing, subcontracting, and the role of intermediary labor agencies that supply care workers. In some countries, the use of 0-hour contracts, that is contracts with no guarantee of minimum working hours, you just work, have become a commonplace. These types of contracts mean an unpredictable and insufficient hours of work, job insecurity, lower pay, and gaps in the social and labor protection, which is contrary to the decent work agenda. Across the global south, where care work is paid and not undertaken in family or community services, it is highly informal. As private care services become unaffordable and public care services provision fails, the public suffers. To this end, this is why then, as trade unions, we need to organize, we need to unionize and be a collective voice. Formal unions and other care workers organizations need to unite and fight for the right to care, because this will mean fighting for the right for decent work for all, while putting forward the state, ensuring that the state indeed works progressively in ensuring that everyone receives decent work and quality public services. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Irene. And a very good reminder, I think Amita has also put in the care manifesto that PSI had started and then now has, I don't know, maybe 1,000 sign-ons. And thank you for reminding us about how PSI has moved from the framing of the care economy to the social reorganization of care, which is a very important and political sort of move as well. And how public services are absolutely central to the social contract between states and the people, and how it is central to ensuring decent work and redistribution of care work, and making sure that it is in line with ILO's decent work agenda. Thank you again, Irene. Our final speaker is Nasheli. Nasheli, if you can come on, please. Nasheli is a feminist, a gender specialist and coordinator at the Latin America and Caribbean platform of Oxfam International, and she recently co-authored a report on the climate crisis, women's rights and care, which we will share on chat. It is in Spanish, and also has been part of the Latin America and Caribbean campaign Ecofeminista. Nasheli, welcome, and if you can speak to us about the momentum that the right to care agenda, as well as public policies around care systems in the Latin America region, and if you can speak to that and give us, so that we end the session on some learning from Latin America and what's happening in Latin America, thanks to the feminist mobilizations that even Laura was speaking about. Nasheli, are you there?
Aquí estoy. Aloni, ¿cómo estás?
Nasheli will speak in Spanish, so please. Great, Nasheli, go ahead.
Here I am. Pues muy buenos días, tardes, noches, donde estén. Un segundo, por favor. Porque estoy escuchando la traducción, entonces estoy haciendo algo. Ya estoy. Ya me cambié. Gracias. Listo. Pues muy honrada igualmente de poder participar esta mañana en México, tarde o noche donde ustedes estén, y muy agradecida de poder estar acá. Y mi intervención, como ya adelantaba Nilanjana, se concentra en 3 puntos. Uno es la vinculación entre el cuidado comunitario y la defensa de la tierra y el territorio, que es algo de lo que estamos trabajando en la región latinoamericana desde Oxfam. 2 es, a partir de estos resultados, cuáles son las apuestas que hacemos a la discusión global, ¿no? Y cuáles son esas apuestas y propuestas que estamos haciendo a la discusión global, y también identificar cuáles son estas líneas de la discusión más del norte global que no necesariamente responden al contexto latinoamericano o quizás del sur global. Y finalmente comentaré, si tengo tiempo, de algunos ejemplos de cómo se ha ido operacionalizando la agenda de cuidados o el marco normativo en la región. Entonces, es importante decir que llevamos tiempo haciendo estas vinculaciones y tejiendo la relación entre justicia climática y justicia de género, y un punto muy obvio y muy natural que nos surge, pero sobre el cual no había suficiente información, es la vinculación entre cuidados comunitarios y defensa de la tierra y el territorio, y yo me atrevo a decir que forman parte de la misma, son las dos caras de la misma moneda, ¿no? Son como dos expresiones del mismo fenómeno que llevan a cabo principalmente mujeres y niñas en comunidades indígenas, rurales, afro del sur global, ¿no? Y esto es algo, por ejemplo, que no está tan, esta vinculación del cuidado al entorno, a la naturaleza, no es algo que vemos necesariamente fuerte reflejado en la discusión más mainstream de cuidado, pero sí es algo que tenemos bastante contemplado desde la región, y cada vez con más fuerza en los compromisos de Buenos Aires que se adoptaron en el marco de la Conferencia Regional de la Mujer de CEPAL recientemente, a los que se refirió ya Laura, ahí sí vienen menciones específicas de la importancia de que las defensoras tomen parte de los procesos de construcción de políticas públicas, en la toma de decisiones relacionadas con la protección al medio ambiente, porque son ellas principalmente quienes sufren los efectos más adversos del cambio climático. Y de allí, si bien igual que cuidados, y también nos lo explicaba Laura, cuidados comunitarios también es un concepto polisémico y estamos en esa construcción, ¿no? de qué exactamente significa, dónde empieza, dónde termina de un cuidado individual a un cuidado comunitario, o qué es cuidado comunitario y no es una actividad de otro tipo. Pero en esta, lo que a nosotros nos ha parecido muy importante reconocer es que los cuidados comunitarios incluyen esta perspectiva, la perspectiva del medio ambiente de manera importante, debido a que cuando hablamos de cuidado para la sostenibilidad de la vida, no estamos hablando únicamente de la vida humana, estamos hablando de las vidas, y de allí la importancia de incluir en el término los conceptos relacionados con ambiente, y por lo tanto las principales actoras a las que esto nos lleva son las defensoras de la tierra y el territorio, ¿no? Importante también decir que esta perspectiva también tiene un toque, una reflexión decolonial, ¿no? Dado que en los pueblos originarios de América Latina, este entendimiento está bastante presente, ¿no? Entonces ya casi me estoy acercando como a mi segundo punto de qué es lo que se está discutiendo en torno a en la región relacionado con los cuidados. Y de aquí lo importante del trabajo que hemos venido haciendo tiene que ver con el impulso a una recomendación general, como la Recomendación General 39, relacionada, enfocada específicamente a mujeres y niñas indígenas, porque esta recomendación y eventualmente su implementación contiene las claves de la importancia de hablar de manera intercultural sobre la defensa, el territorio y la naturaleza, los medios de vida, como algo inherente, digamos, al trabajo que hacen las comunidades indígenas, específicamente las mujeres. Y de allí la generación de estadística, el diseño y el financiamiento de políticas públicas será muy importante. Tenemos mucho cuidado siempre cuando hablamos de cuidados comunitarios, de que no permee una visión romántica de que los cuidados comunitarios son, digamos, como la panacea, sino que también actualmente, y como los conocemos, están muy cargados de sesgos de género y permea esta división sexual del trabajo. Son todavía, por supuesto, las mujeres las que llevan a cabo este trabajo, y es importante reconocerlo y desde allí también trabajar para transformar. Lo que es importante reconocer es que en esta concepción más amplia de la economía del cuidado, ¿no? Aquí hablaré de cuidado en singular cuando hable como de este mainstream del cuidado, es que, como les decía, no necesariamente reflejan las realidades de nuestra región, y corremos el riesgo de dejar fuera muchas expresiones, incluso ancestrales, cuando buscamos, por ejemplo, limitar el entendimiento de cuidados a infraestructura únicamente como algo que sucede mucho dentro del norte, ¿no? Los cuidados comunitarios nos amplían, digamos, y es algo desde lo que vale la pena como revisarlo como una propuesta para complementar lo que se está discutiendo desde el norte. Y no es una casualidad que siendo el territorio más desigual de esta región, la más desigual del mundo, aquí es también donde se están llevando a cabo estas discusiones desde hace tiempo sobre el tema del cuidado. Y un ejemplo específico sobre el cual me quiero concentrar de algo que se tiene que discutir en una discusión más amplia es debido también a la enorme diversidad de nuestra población y como resultado de las actividades extractivas y la variabilidad climática, el impacto que esto tiene en la escasez de alimentos, la disminución de la fertilidad de la tierra y la pérdida de biodiversidad, las dificultades en el acceso y la distribución de los recursos energéticos, ya lo decía Ritu, e hídricos, y la deforestación. Y esto deriva en una sobrecarga de cuidados para las mujeres y las familias, que además se profundizan con la problemática relacionada a la corporativización de los estados y el cierre de los espacios cívicos y la criminalización de los movimientos de defensa de los derechos humanos y del territorio. Y entonces vemos aquí una imbricación, ¿no?, de las distintas, de las problemáticas, pero reconocemos que desde las mujeres del sur, estas discusiones relacionadas con el modelo de vida y la forma en la que se están llevando a cabo estas luchas es algo que debe de permear también en las discusiones del norte, entendiendo que es este modelo de desarrollo el que está teniendo impactos en el sur, y considerar dentro de la discusión de cuidados el modelo de desarrollo desde el norte nos va a ayudar a reducir o mitigar estos impactos en las vidas de las mujeres en el sur, ¿no? Y es por eso también que para nosotros es importante como feministas estar observando y evaluando, ¿no?, el desarrollo de las políticas públicas y cada vez más meter el componente de fiscalidad, porque si no nos mantenemos en la discusión sobre lo deseable, pero no realmente lo factible, y lo factible desde el sur es que hagamos transiciones y hagamos transformaciones dentro de los modelos fiscales que permitan garantizar políticas públicas para donde se vincule el tema del cuidado directamente, ¿no? Entonces, necesitamos necesariamente de estar atentas y observantes de cómo las apuestas relacionadas con el cuidado no van perdiendo su contenido, que esto es algo que relacionado con el momentum que estamos viviendo sobre cuidados pudiéramos perder. Y finalmente, quisiera traer a la reflexión dos de los ejemplos que me parecen importantes sobre políticas públicas o implementación de políticas públicas que se están llevando a cabo en la región, y que además quisiera vincularlos con el tema de la CCW de este año, que está relacionada con las brechas digitales y la capacidad digital de las mujeres, porque en estas dos políticas públicas me parece que es clave el acceso a la información y a los datos que se van generando, ¿no? Entonces, para el primer caso, y es un caso emblemático, un caso ejemplar, el caso de la ciudad de Bogotá, que ha construido sistemas localizados de cuidado y territoriales, llamadas las manzanas de cuidado, como las cuadras de cuidados, que son espacios en donde se integran una variedad de servicios relacionados con el cuidado y que les permita reducir a las mujeres el tiempo que utilizan en estas labores, para lo cual, con el apoyo de CEPAL, la alcaldía de Bogotá contó con información estadística integrada sumamente importante, que ayuda a identificar dónde son esos territorios donde tienen que colocarse esas manzanas de cuidado y qué tipo de servicios son los que más se requieren. Entonces, es un ejemplo bastante exitoso de lo que se puede hacer en una ciudad capital con voluntad política y con recursos, voluntad política que se refleja en recursos. Y el otro ejemplo, más enfocado al reconocimiento dentro del marco normativo, es el de la Ciudad de México, donde desde 2017 se garantiza el derecho a cuidado en la Constitución local, y esto deriva en obligaciones a las autoridades para que consideren dentro de sus políticas focalizadas a los territorios, en las alcaldías, como está dividida la Ciudad de México, estos servicios públicos universales, accesibles y pertinentes, suficientes y de calidad para desarrollar, para disminuir la situación de dependencia, enfermedad y discapacidad, el tiempo que dedican las mujeres a atender estos temas. Entonces, por un lado, tenemos un marco normativo ya específico donde mandata el tema para tratar de relacionarlo con lo que nos señala Laura Pautasi, y por otro lado tenemos una implementación de política pública específica y territorial, como es el caso de Bogotá, y tienen para cerrar, dos aspectos en común que me parece muy importante dejar aquí señalados. Y uno es la participación tenaz de la sociedad civil en la creación y en el impulso de estas políticas públicas y marcos normativos. La sociedad civil ha sido clave para estos ejemplos y todos los que han habido en la región al respecto, junto con el apoyo de la academia, por supuesto, pero principalmente han sido la sociedad civil. Y el último, y con esto cierro, la falta, algo también triste que debemos de reconocer, es la falta de articulación entre lo que se está planteando y las políticas fiscales a lo que ya me refería. Estas iniciativas ambas son muy ambiciosas, pero su sostenibilidad no está garantizada, sino que todavía está muy vinculada con el trabajo que se hace con la cooperación internacional y algunos otros ajustes presupuestales que se hacen cada vez, pero que necesitan estar, y ese es el siguiente paso, poder hacer una vinculación mucho más estrecha con la política fiscal. Y con esto cierro. Muchas gracias, Amy.
Thank you so much, Nasheli. And you've expanded it more to bring in environment and climate justice as well. So it's not you've broadened the question as well, and I see that Veronica has also. But let me stop because we don't have a lot of time, and I think there are a few questions. So I'm going to just. They're not. Maybe there's one to specifically Nasheli, but I'm going to start with the first question, which is from Shishti, and you can decide. Any of the speakers, you can decide whether you want to. Who wants to respond to this? So the first is women represent around 50% of the total population of international migrants worldwide and often find work in traditionally female-dominated occupations such as domestic work, performing a whole range of care work, removed from their families, and so on. Their remittances are what add to the state's revenue. Atomized care is not just failing the social contract with its own nationals, but also migrants. Where do speakers see the two movements forging stronger forces in the global landscape of women's labor plus human rights? Do we have any takers for that question? Anyone can.
Actually, I'd like
Okay.
thank you.
Ritu? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I'd just like to add, I mean, it's so fundamentally important, you know, this entire issue. And I don't think enough work has been done, or at least has not been visibilized, the kind of work which has been done on this. There is also an addition, I think, which is extremely important, is to link up labor rights and labor movements, you know, which go beyond the paid, unpaid component and get into the care aspect. So that, I think, is one area which needs much more integration in terms of issues, in terms of struggles, and also I think in terms of perspective. I think that is something which is very essential. So, but there is a lot of work, a lot of movements, but not visibilized. And I think that's a task we all need to take up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ritu. If anybody else wants to come in on that, please feel welcome. There's a specific question for you, Nasheli, or maybe Laura has left, but even Natalia could possibly. I see Veronica from PSI is also here, so she can also come in. Can you please elaborate on the community care momentum by women for conservation of biodiversity in Latin America?
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias por la pregunta. Solo cambio mi traducción. Muchas gracias por la pregunta. Para nosotros, tratando de puntualizar, y voy a dejar acá en el chat la publicación donde hacemos esta esta vinculación. Voy a dejar dos publicaciones, una relacionada con justicia climática y justicia de género, y hay un apartado específico sobre el rol de las mujeres en el cuidado de la tierra, y otro artículo que salió a finales de diciembre, a finales del año pasado, donde hablamos específicamente de experiencias de socias y aliadas que están trabajando en la defensa del territorio y cómo está vinculado con el tal cual con el cuidado comunitario. Y sobre estos puntos, lo que en esta publicación y el trabajo que hemos hecho con ellas encontramos es que sus roles, y me gustó mucho escuchar, me interesó mucho cuando escuché a Ritu hablar del tema de la gestión energética, ¿no? En estas comunidades las mujeres hacen mucho del trabajo de gestión energética y de los recursos hídricos, y entonces directamente están relacionadas con el cuidado que se tiene que hacer a los ríos, a los bosques. Ahora se me están yendo algunos otros de fuentes directas de energía, y que están en constante asedio por parte de las industrias, principalmente las industrias extractivas. De allí es que desde el cuidado comunitario, desde esta labor que llevan a cabo principalmente las mujeres de sus comunidades, y debido al contacto que tienen con los recursos naturales, es que identificamos una labor casi automática, ¿no? Por no decir natural, porque natural sería un término que en este momento resulta mucho más complejo, pero una labor automática entre el cuidado de unos, de la comunidad, y el cuidado de la naturaleza. Y desde allí, igual que para el caso del concepto amplio de cuidados, no hay límites específicos y claros, ¿no? Y esto lo notamos muchísimo en las comunidades indígenas de nuestra región, donde se habla del cuidado de la casa. Y el cuidado de la casa no es únicamente la infraestructura que sostiene, sino más bien la casa grande, ¿no? La casa, la tierra. Y el cuidado de la casa está desde allí trabajándose. No sé si estoy alcanzando a contestar tu pregunta, pero voy a dejar acá las dos publicaciones para que yo creo que donde se puede aclarar un poco más. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Shelley. Again, it's open for others to come in as well. I'm going to read out another question from Caitlin, which is basically speaking to the gap in the integration of right to care for older people with care and support needs. And sort of how do we address that? Those working on long-term care support from aging side are often missing links with rights for carers, gender and equity and labor rights. We need to bridge this gap. Very, very, very true, Caitlin. And I think that it does include elder care as well. And I'm wondering if Irene or Veronica want to speak to the carers in the elder care sector. Okay. So I think that we have Irene. Did you want to come in?
Yes. Thank you very much. Well, the carers those who are caring for the elderly, that is the social aspect. That caring sector is very much undervalued, or it's not taken into cognizance that it is indeed care. It is indeed the component of caring. It's as if it's only performing informal work. So it is very important that the elderly people are not marginalized, and the carers, they're taken care of as well. equally paid, and making sure that the infrastructure, the health system's infrastructure favors all the care workers, whether in the social part, that is the carers who are caring for the elderly, or in the paid workers part, that is the professional part. And basically those who are caring for the older people, sometimes it is nurses, and sometimes it is just employees that are caring for it's just carers that are caring for the elderly people. So it's important that they are not marginalized. They also benefit from the agenda, from the decent care work agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Irene. And I think Caitlin, maybe Fatima, maybe it'll be good to connect to PSI as well. They have so many, and they do have elder care sort of networks and unions as well. Fatima, please go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you. I think this is such an excellent question. They were all excellent questions, actually. But I really appreciate the one from Caitlin, because it is such a critical issue, and it is such an invisible part of the work that's done. Thinking about the continent, thinking about Africa more broadly, the biggest narrative has always been about our youth dividend. And so what this means is that even if we were to move towards embedding a care economy, there is the danger that there will be this bias and this focus on the younger population, despite the fact that we have projections that our elderly population will be doubling nonetheless because of longer life expectancies, but they will still remain a small minority for quite a few decades to come. And so it really comes back to this issue of value, I think, in the way in which we value, because even care itself, has sort of a value system attached to it. The way in which care for children and care for youth would be considered more valuable because of the potential of their productivity, as opposed to the elderly, and the way in which we do not value the wisdom of the elderly and the knowledge that they bring. And so it really comes down to revaluing and reanalyzing the way in which we conceptualize care. And again, this brings us back to Ubuntu and Bon Vivre and the other concepts that we find in many other parts of the world that link to this. And I think this also has a very strong linkage to the discussion around land, and the way in which we are looking not just at humanity, but the care for the resources that we deal with as well, because it is within the knowledge of our elders actually that we have this understanding of how we are custodians of the land and how we are custodians of our resources. So there's a huge piece of work that needs to happen around the way in which we conceptualize what our societies are for, what our economies are for, and the way in which we then plug in well-being of people and planet into potentially what a public provisioning of care could look like. So in many ways, we have to have a re-philosophizing and a problematizing of all of this before we suddenly become technocratic. Because the moment we become technocratic, this is where the gaps can start to appear, such as the elderly.
And I think that that's the perfect note to close the panel. Thank you, Fatima. And I know that there are maybe a couple of questions, but we are almost at the end, and I do want to thank, if all the speakers can turn on their cameras along with me so we can all see you. Thank you so much to all the amazing speakers, Laura, Ritu, Fatima, Natalia, Irene, Nasheli, and Anam as the discussant. Thank you so much for your time here, and I hope that we continue this conversation. And I do want to also thank the amazing interpreters. We would have been dominated by English if we didn't have you here. The Anglophones are continuing to dominate. Even those of us who've been colonized continue to dominate. So I do want to thank Muna, Elena, Remy, Laura? Am I forgetting any of the interpreters? Thank you for your interpretation. A massive thank you to Letu, who came in at the last minute to support us putting this together. and she did a brilliant job as she usually does. And of course, thank you to all the co-sponsors, PSI, NAVI, Nasheli. Did I forget Nasheli? How could I forget Nasheli as a... I could not. How could I forget my sister Nasheli? I'm so sorry, Nasheli. Forgive me. Of course, Nasheli. And thank you to the the co-sponsors, Navi, PSI, Vigo. We couldn't have done this without you. And a massive thank you to Amita, who basically pulled this whole thing together, stressing as she did. Amita, do come on. Do come on, put your camera on so we can see you. Amita, for pulling this whole thing together, a big thank you to you. I'm going to close now. We're 1 minute away, so closing now. Thank you, everyone, for this. We're going to continue this conversation.
Yeah, I join Nilanjana and thanking all of you in making this a success. It was wonderful listening to all of you. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.